Hello there guys and welcome, it is Niran here, and today it is time for me to bring you something a little bit different. Today I'm going to be bringing you my 2016 Formula 1 driver lineup predictions. I know a lot of people have done this already, and I know a lot of people have done it a long time ago, but with it coming into silly season now, we're at Belgium and Monza just spell driver changes all over the shop. So I thought it'd be a decent time to do this. There's still a lot of seats up for grabs, but you know, it's also, you know, I can take a few rumours into account as well to help me make a pretty, hopefully, a fairly decent prediction. So obviously we should start with the top teams and work our way down to the new team, of course, Haas in Formula 1 at the end. Now, obviously we're going to start off with Mercedes. Best team, undoubtedly, when it comes to like consistency and pace or whatever. That's beyond the point. I can't see personally anything beyond Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg for another season. I don't know if they've been signed on officially. I know Nico Rosberg's in a contract, so that's fine. He's going to be in the seat next year. I can only assume Lewis Hamilton will continue that seat. He's been linked with Ferrari, but why? I'm looking at this from a non-passionate perspective. At some point in their career, every driver wants to drive for Ferrari, but realistically at this point in time, there is absolutely no point in trading Mercedes for Ferrari. It happens every single year with Lewis Hamilton being linked with Ferrari. I see no difference this time. It's never materialised in him actually getting a drive at Ferrari, so I see no change this time either. So I think we're going to see the same Mercedes lineup as we saw in 2015, 2014 and 2013. Next up, we've got Ferrari. Now, here we go. Here's some juicy driver lineups to get into now. Sebastian Vettel, there's no doubt about him keeping his drive for 2016, but Kimi Raikkonen is the cork in the bottle for quite a few other driver changes, a little bit like Fernando Alonso was when exiting Ferrari last year, and we saw a lot of different driver changes coming in last year because of that, and that will happen again if the bosses at Ferrari decide that Kimi Raikkonen isn't doing a good enough job. Now, I think it was before Austria, they already called him out, saying he needed to do better in qualifying. That might have been China. It was around that time in the season they said he needed to do better in qualifying, and then they said he needed to do better in the races around Austria. Austria, he then crashed, so you can probably assume that unless Kimi Raikkonen has a pretty astounding end to the season, he's going to end up getting axed. Now that brings up a whole different argument of who's going to replace him. 3 drivers have been linked so far, excluding any sort of reserve drivers. They're not going to get the seat, but the 3 drivers who've been linked: Daniel Ricciardo, who doesn't look as if he's going to go there anymore, Nico Hülkenberg, but mainly Valtteri Bottas. Now, Nico Hülkenberg is just sort of forever the unlucky guy. He's been overlooked by so many big seats in the past, and when I put him against Valtteri Bottas, in my mind, I'd say he's going to get overlooked again. I can't see any way that Ferrari would be taking a bit of a gamble if they choose Nico Hülkenberg. He's older, less proven, not through his own doing, because he's never been given the opportunity to get podiums or wins because of the car he's been in. Williams, Force India, Sauber, Force India again, never really offered a podium scoring car. Whereas Valtteri Bottas has obviously proved himself by beating Felipe Massa last year, coming fourth in the championship. He's ahead of Massa just about this year, but the safe option is to go with Valtteri Bottas. So Hülkenberg could get overlooked again. So my final sort of prediction for Ferrari for next season is Kimi Raikkonen getting axed, and we'll see Valtteri Bottas lining up, partnering Sebastian Vettel, and sort of filling in that vacant finish seat, if you like. So a few complications are that Hülkenberg's German. Ferrari perhaps weren't wanting 2 German drivers in their team. Not entirely sure why that is, but I suppose it's slightly understandable, but nevertheless, that could work against Hülkenberg as well. But also, Bottas has got a fairly decent buyout clause in his Williams contract. Now, if Valtteri Bottas does leave, that leaves a seat open at Williams, and one of the guys we just talked about is probably the leading contender to take it. So whether or not he's been linked with this seat, or whether he's been linked with this seat or not, I'm going to actually predict that Nico Hülkenberg, whether he should or not, is probably going to end up going to Williams and partnering Felipe Massa. Obviously, if Bottas goes to Ferrari, it leaves a seat vacant. And if Nico Hülkenberg is wanting to leave Force India to go to, a bigger team, Williams is probably the best opportunity he's going to get. Haas is slightly unpredictable. I'll talk about them a little bit more later, but in my opinion, despite him being heavily linked with Ferrari and heavily linked with Haas, if the whole driver transfer system is set off by Kimi Raikkonen leaving Ferrari, Bottas goes to Ferrari, I think Nico Hülkenberg should go to Williams, and I think that's Williams' best option. Of course, they can't go for someone like, they can go for Jenson Button. I was going to say they can't go for Felipe Nasr. They can't go for Felipe Nasr because him and Ericsson have been signed to Sauber. I'll get onto that a little bit later. In my opinion, Jenson Button, I think I don't know, I'll talk about him later, but I don't think he'll go to Williams. And Alex Lynn, their reserve driver, really isn't ready for Formula 1 yet. So I think really the best option for them is Nico Hülkenberg. So my prediction for Williams is Felipe Massa and Nico Hülkenberg, which leaves a seat open at Force India amongst my predictions, which I'll get onto a little bit later on. Now, in terms of the staying candidates, got Red Bull. I don't see any reason for those guys to change their driver lineup. Obviously, Red Bull hire from within these days, so you don't get guys like Mark Webber coming in from outside or David Coulthard or whatever the such like. They go through the Toro Rosso system first, and given Sainz and Verstappen are both in their first season, I don't think either of those are going to be promoted. Kvyat had a shaky start, but I don't see any reason for him to be replaced right now. Especially if it's going to be someone who's so inexperienced like Sainz or Verstappen. Daniel Ricciardo will obviously keep his seat. I don't think he'll go to Ferrari, so I think he'll stay at Red Bull and probably hope for a better car next year. So my driver prediction for Red Bull Renault is obviously for Daniel Ricciardo and Danny Kvyat to stay on a little bit like Mercedes driver lineup. Again, that pretty much plugs a hole for Toro Rosso as well. They can't really go for anyone else. Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz have both produced good performances this season when the car hasn't let them down, especially Sainz, who would have picked up probably 20 more points than he has now had that Renault engine not given up on him multiple times throughout the season. Same for Max Verstappen. So I think those guys should stay. I think the second season for them, as is always the case at Toro Rosso, will be hugely important. They'll have to maybe step up a little bit more. Again, you've got to take into account the car's performance. If the car isn't willing to let you get good performances in, then that's always going to be difficult. But obviously Max Verstappen getting that fourth in Hungary has probably gone down very well amongst the Toro Rosso camp. So my prediction for Toro Rosso is for them to maintain the Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz driver lineup. Now, I talked about Nico Hülkenberg a little bit later on, and him going, a little bit earlier on even, and him going to Williams. And if that is the case, that would leave a seat open at Force India. Now, Sergio Perez, I think, is already signed to stay on with Force India next season, but of course there is a second seat left. And realistically, I know lots of people have been talking about Nico Hülkenberg leaving, but no one's really talked about who would replace him if he went to Haas or if he went to Ferrari or if he, in my opinion, went to Williams. Now, there's quite a few drivers here that I think should go. We've got, or that they could choose from. They've got Jolyon Palmer, who has been linked with Force India in the past, but is currently a Lotus reserve driver, but don't see him getting into the fold in the sort of the starting, the actual main driver's fold there. So I think he might have to look elsewhere. Their reserve driver, obviously Daniel Juncadella, although I think he's gone off and done DTM now, so he's a lot less likely. Adrian Sutil, who's out of a job at the moment, he could perhaps come back in to raise vital funds that Force India might need. But in my opinion, there's someone that no one's really talked about when it comes to the silly season, linked with Mercedes because of his drive at McLaren last season, Kevin Magnussen. Now, I don't know if he's ever been linked with Force India before, or whether he's a viable candidate. But if I'm Vijay Mallya and I know Nico Hülkenberg's going to go, it's looking likely. If Nico Hülkenberg stays, then there's no issue. But if Nico Hülkenberg goes, with the drivers that are about, surely Kevin Magnussen is the best shout out of those. So I don't know. It's almost what I want to happen, because I want to see the best drivers possible in the sport, and I do rate Kevin Magnussen. I don't see him getting a drive with McLaren in the near future, especially with Stoffel Van Dorn coming through. So in me wanting to see him on the grid, I would almost sort of expect him to be linked with Force India if Nico Hülkenberg were to go to Williams. So my out there prediction for Force India is that Sergio Perez and Kevin Magnussen will be the drivers for next season, and that would be one hell of a lineup. We said that about Perez and Hülkenberg when that was announced 2 years ago, and that could be the same here if Kevin Magnussen is announced as a second driver. Lotus, another boring one. Both their drivers have been signed up for next season, so my prediction for that is going to be Romain Grosjean and Pastor Maldonado, because it looks as if that's going to be the case. So no inclusion of Davide Valsecchi or Jolyon Palmer or even Carmen Jorda for that matter. Sauber, again, signed both drivers. Felipe Nasr, who will perhaps be disappointed not to be in the fold for a Williams driver. Valtteri Bottas does go, because you feel as if with his links to Williams in the past, he would have been the surefire replacement. He would have been the shoe-in guy just to step into the fold and take on Valtteri Bottas' seat, but he's been officially signed to Sauber. Not that contracts matter too much at Sauber, as we know in the past, but of course the other driver being signed there, Marcus Ericsson, as is the case for this 2015 season, which sort of shuts the door on guys like Sergei Sirotkin and Raffaele Marciello, the two GP2 guys who have been linked with Sauber, linked with Ferrari a lot in the past. So unfortunately no way in for them seemingly at the moment. I think Marciello could do with another GP2 season, and maybe Sergei Sirotkin, if Stoffel Van Dorn moves on, could be the lead candidate for a GP2 title in 2016. But now moving on to the final three teams, because I do realise this video has been slightly longer than I perhaps would have wanted. So we'll move on to McLaren. Now I think Fernando Alonso will stay and keep that seat with McLaren Honda. Hopefully for him, he'll see a bit of improvement in his second season. But for me, the second driver spot has to go to the guy who's already with them at the moment. Now, Jenson Button, I know a lot of people have been saying he should retire and whatnot, but from a McLaren Honda perspective, you have to keep Jenson Button. The experience in improving this car between Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button is monumental. The other option, of course, is bringing in Stoffel Van Dorn, who will be quick, maybe even quicker than Jenson Button. But for now, in getting that competitive streak back, in getting the car actually to a point where it can get podiums and win races with the new McLaren Honda partnership, it has to be surely Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button. From a fan perspective, I would love to see Stoffel Van Dorn come in. I love Jenson Button, but I know he's been talking a lot about, well, he's not been talking a lot, he's been talking a lot about being fed up with Formula 1. That's led to him lots of rumours sort of circulating that he might want to retire. But for me, I think from a McLaren perspective, from the boss's perspective, from a Ron Dennis perspective, they really have to keep hold of Alonso and Jenson Button, because they are the two men who are most likely to get that car good during 2016. Then Stoffel Van Dorn can just jump straight in when Jenson Button surely retires at the end of 2016. Maybe give him a test roll for 2016 so he can get used to the car. So in 2017, you know, he's almost a veteran in the car, not in race and sort of environment or atmosphere, but he knows the car well because he's tested with it. So despite the speculation, my prediction for McLaren is that Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button will stay on. I think that should be the case anyway, whether that does happen or not. Now, Mana's a bit of a tricky one. We now move on to Mana, and that's a tricky one because they basically need anyone who brings in sponsorship. For me, I know it's a slightly difficult one because it's bringing two Brits into one team, but I think they should go with Will Stevens, who they have now, who is proven to be quicker than Roberto Merri. He's had a jump over him for the majority of the season, sort of excluding a few races, and Jordan King, who's their reserve driver at the moment, purely because he brings in sponsorship. I know there's other guys out there like Johnny Giacotto, Oliver Rowland, who perhaps are linked with Mana, maybe even Dean Stoneman as well, but whether they bring in the same type of sponsorship as Jordan King does, the current Racing Engineering GP2 driver, I'm not entirely sure. Other than that, I think really Will Stevens and Roberto Merri are more likely to get the better results, but it's not really about results at the moment. It's about getting the money to be competitive in the future and survive for Mana. So for me, Will Stevens and perhaps Jordan King with that is it Godfellas, or something, or other sponsorship, they should be the guys who get those seats. So then finally, we now move on to the team that perhaps provides the most talking points, and that is Haas, the new team for Formula 1, the American-based team. If you don't know already, Haas are going to be joining, Haas F1, led by an American billionaire, are going to be joining F1. They seem to have a pretty decent budget in comparison to the newbies that we've seen in Formula 1 recently, like HRT, sort of Virgin, that then became Mana through various names, and Caterham as well. So they should be fairly competitive. Now, I know Esteban Gutierrez and Jean-Eric Vergne have been heavily linked with that because Haas are themselves heavily linked to Ferrari. Esteban Gutierrez and Jean-Eric Vergne are both reserve drivers for Ferrari. Given the recent speculation as I'm commentating this, I think the seat will go to Esteban Gutierrez. He's been linked with that seat in the last few weeks, far more than Jean-Eric Vergne has, who's obviously got Formula E commitments over the next sort of calendar year. But I personally think it should be Jean-Eric Vergne. I think he brings a lot more pace to the table, but Esteban Gutierrez brings a lot more sponsorship to the table with Claro and Mexico and whatnot. Now that pretty much just leaves the second seat, and I think really it's been talked about a lot, and I'm going to agree with the majority here. I think it should be Alexander Rossi. The US connection, Haas themselves have talked about wanting a US driver. They've been linked with guys like Connor Daly, Danica Patrick, but at the moment, in terms of a surefire, decent American driver who could probably do an okay job at least in Formula 1, there's only really one candidate, because there's not too many American F1 drivers linked or, whatnot out there, and that's got to be Alexander Rossi. Second at the moment in the GP2 Championship, got a serious shot at the title, fairly experienced, has missed out on F1 seats in the past with Manor before Belgium, with Caterham, and with Manor as well, or Marussia as they were back then. But I think the seats then, the predictions that I'm going to make are Esteban Gutierrez and Alexander Rossi, even though from a Haas perspective, I think it should be Jean-Eric Vergne and Alexander Rossi. But that is it. That concludes my driver predictions. I realise this has been 15 minutes, and that's really annoyed me because I wanted this video to be at least half the time, but nevertheless, I suppose it's more of an in-depth thing. If you did enjoy, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you are new around here. Comment about enjoying the video if you enjoyed it that much, as well as your opinions on who you think will get the respective drives in Formula 1 next year. If you agree or disagree with any of my thoughts in this video, just drop it in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to read all of them. But it's been a pleasure ranting at you guys today. Have a good day, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.